Hello and welcome back to our series of learning how to code in P5.js. Today in this video, we will be introducing branching in code, and we will learn how to do it through using conditional statements. So let's get started. All right, so before we actually begin to write our code, there are a couple of things that I would like to discuss with you. One of them is what exactly is a conditional and why do we want to use it, right? So if you have already watched the previous videos and if you've started to learn a bit around coding, you understand that there are a set of instructions that we are writing in our code, right? And all of those are just happening in a very linear fashion. What if we want to introduce some sort of branching in our coding that may help us run our code efficiently or perhaps achieve whatever we are intending to do or create through our coding, right? For instance, think of it in, let's say, normal every day-to-day English language. For instance, if you say, okay, if it is going to rain today, only then I'm going to wear a jacket, right? So what you're trying to say is that if it's not going to rain, I'll perhaps be out and about in my t-shirt, and I'm only going to wear this jacket if it rains, right? So what you've done is you've put a condition, which if it is going to be met, only then you're going to perform some task. That's the kind of thing that we are trying to do through our coding as well. Let me show you what is the kind of structure that we will be using. So there is a syntax that we are going to introduce in our code. So it's basically this one. What you're going to do is basically you're going to say an if statement, and then you're going to use parentheses within which your condition is going to be written. And then within the curly brackets, like any other function, if you see here, right, you're going to put your set of code, which is basically your instruction. So let's say if you put any question inside it, if that happens to be true, only then you're going to run this code. And then there's another thing, which is else, and then you can put, this is an optional thing. So if this condition is met, you're going to do one thing, else you're going to, can give another condition or not, and then, run another piece of code instead. So this is the basic kind of structure, right? So think of it, again, going back to our English statement, if it is going to rain, I'll wear a jacket. So here I'm going to put my condition, if it is raining, if it happens, yes, I'll wear a jacket, else nothing, my regular t-shirt or whatever. So that is the kind of structure. The little caveat in this one, or the little problem, or it's something that you need to keep in mind for putting in instructions in our code, is that we have to make sure that our condition, which is basically our question, which we will put, has to result in a yes or no format. By a yes or no format means that we need to phrase our question in a way that the answer comes out to be either true or false, so that it can identify if the condition is met or not. If it is met, that means it's true, which is the Boolean sort of thing that we have discussed before, and that's going to help us run our code. So let's just do a quick example. Let me just put this structure out here first. So this is the basic structure. If parentheses within which our condition will reside, and then there is going to be curly brackets within which our set of instructions or our code will be. So that's one thing. The other thing that I want to discuss about is some of these relational operators. So what are these relational operators? Think of it like, and these are simpler ones that we have done in our high school math as well, right? What they are doing is they are a lot of times helpful for us to compare certain conditions and in return get some Boolean responses, right? So for instance, we can use this greater than sign. So for instance, if 13 is greater than 8, I mean, yes, that is happening, then something would happen. So these are either relational or Boolean operators that you can think of. These are super helpful for us in terms of constructing our statements. So greater than or less than. Another one, if you want it to be greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Another one is this equal sign. So this is an important thing to remember. So think about our previous video, in which we were talking about variables, and we used a single equal sign. So remember that operator is not a sign of equality. It actually means that we're only assigning a certain value. So a single equal sign in coding language is just used as an assigning operator and not as an equal to kind of condition to be met. So if we need something to be equal to something, we will put double equal sign. And then there is this exclamation mark with a single equal sign. That means that this is not equal to something. Okay, so let's try and start with something that we kind of know. So this is the basic structure. Before we begin with this, think about it. Okay, we know how to create shapes, right? So let's try to create a rectangle here. For instance, let's try to create a rectangle vertically, which covers half of the canvas. So how are we going to go about it? So we will say, okay, you're going to start from 0, 0, which is the top left corner. And then you're going to cover half of canvas. Remember, width is already understood by P5 library as the width of the canvas. So we are just saying half of the width of the canvas. And then we can say half of the height of canvas. We can also fill it with some color. So let's just say, I don't know, 10, 200, 200. For now, I'm going to comment this out. Oh, we want it to be fully, right? Okay, so what it is doing, okay, let's just do a no stroke quickly. Okay, so what this is doing is it has actually divided our canvas and created a rectangle, which is exactly half of this canvas. Okay, so we kind of know this, right? Creating shapes and filling them with colors is something that we totally understand. So for instance, now this is static, right? What if I wanted to be saying that, okay, only if my mouse or my cursor is on this half of the canvas, which means on the left half of the canvas, you're going to change the color. Otherwise, it's going to be whatever the background color is for now. All right. So that means that here we are already branching it out, right? We are going to put some kind of conditional statement. Now we have to think about it, and we will try to phrase them in a way where we can get an answer in either a yes or no, so that the coding environment understands if it is true or false, and then it can actually execute. So I'm going to undo here my syntax of condition. Let us keep this here just because we want everything to be no stroke. And this is the kind of code that we wanted to follow, right? Like if my mouse is here in the top left, in the first half of the canvas, like on the left side, I want the color to appear. I want the box to appear. So I'm going to put this inside here, which is already where I will be putting my instructions, right? Now we have to create here our conditions, which is going to reside in these parentheses. So think about it first in English. How are we going to do that? So what we are saying is, if the position of my cursor, of my mouse, is greater than the starting point, which is 0, or is less than the half of the canvas, right? Mouse's X position. Only then you're going to perform something. So let's just put in here exactly that. We know that mouse X is something that the P5 library already understands, right? Because that's the X position of the mouse. So if we say if mouse X is less than half of the width of the canvas, you are already doing this, right? So now if you can already see, right? If my mouse is on the left side of the canvas, it is turning blue. Otherwise, whenever it is greater than half of the width of the canvas, it disappears, right? Well, technically disappear means that it is not appearing just because, the condition is not being met. So the condition is false. So that is one thing. But if, let's say, I want this to appear only, or maybe let's just introduce another color on the second half of the canvas. So I can do an additional thing, right? I can introduce an optional else statement, right? So within this, we can put something which will determine about the right side of the canvas. So what would that look like? So I'm going to try and copy and paste just so that we can make it a bit easier. Let it be. So, okay, so now if you see, technically they're in the same position, but it is actually meeting the condition. I'm going to just change that just to make it easier. So imagine my cursor is on the left side of the canvas, which is less than half of the width of the canvas. It is blue. And if my mouse is greater than, or actually it moves on the right side of the canvas, which means it's greater than half of the canvas, it's turning it into this new color, pink, fuchsia, whatever. But let's just move it here so that we can change the color of this gray one. So what do we need to do? So it is basically at this point in time, it will be starting with half of the width, and then Y position as 0. And then it will basically be doing this. All right. So this condition is so far met, right? Let me just format this because it's going to take a little while, and we get our sprinkled. So now what we are saying is, if my mouse's X position is less than width, half of the width, turn this side blue. If it's on this side, turn it pink, right? Basically create these blocks. Let's try to add something more to it. What if we want to divide it not just into like these 2 quadrants, but maybe we want to divide it into the 4 quadrants, right? How are we going to do that? Because right now it is only being impacted by the X position of my mouse. But in order to create or divide it into like 4 halves, not 4 halves, but like 4 quadrants, right? We need to understand not just the X position of the canvas, but also the Y position, so that it can position itself better within that one quadrant. For that, we think about it. So what we are saying it in English is, let's say if my mouse's X position is basically less than half of the width and also less than half of the canvas, right? Which means that it will be in the top quadrant. Only then you're going to do or color this quadrant as blue. Okay, so for that, we need to go back and try and understand one more thing. What we are trying to say is now basically we are giving it 2 conditions. And how are we going to introduce these 2 conditions? So here are these called logical operators, if you can see. What they are actually doing is they help us in creating multi-part questions. So that means that if I have 2 or more conditions to be met, I can introduce either an and or an or, basically. So the way we write or is not basically with an or, but with these 2 parallel lines. And if we want to say and, we actually use ampersand signs twice. Okay, so what that means is, now again, let's think it in English. So for instance, if we say, if it will rain and it will be cold, I'll wear a jacket, right? Now what I'm saying is that both the conditions need to be met, right? So if it is going to be cold plus wet, only then I'm wearing a jacket. But if it only rains, I'm not going to wear a jacket. And if it's only cold, I'm not going to wear a jacket. However, if you say, if it rains or it's cold, I'll wear gloves. That means that if both the conditions are met, if it's cold or rainy, if it's happening both, I'll still wear gloves. If it is only raining, I'll still wear gloves. If it is only cold, I'll still wear gloves. I will not wear gloves if none of those things happen, right? So there's this little difference that we need to sort of keep in mind, right? If we want both the conditions to be met, or if we want any of those conditions to be met and certain set of instructions to be executed. So those things are important. And let's try and introduce here our second condition to actually create this rectangle in only our first quadrant. So if I say or maybe let's make it in half, right? So what I'm doing here is if my cursor is here as well in this quadrant, it is still showing me this color. However, I just want it to be within this when my cursor is in this quadrant. So if I want to do that, I'll go here and add another condition. So I'll say and. So what I have said previously is if the position of my mouse is less than half of the width, now I'll introduce the Y position of my mouse as well. So if my mouse X is less than half of the width and my mouse Y is also less than half of the height, only then you're going to. So now if you see, okay, don't worry about this else statement, because else means that if none of those things happen in any other condition, you're going to just like execute all the rest of what is instructed. But if you focus on this one, as long as my mouse is in the first quadrant, my condition, which is set out here, my set of instructions which are set out here are executed. So let's try and here try to do the same for our second condition. So here I'm going to else doesn't work because we need another condition. So we'll say else if, and else if is something optional, but you can keep on adding as many conditions as you want. So here I'll say else if mouse X, what do you think, is greater than half of the width and my mouse Y is my mouse Y is less than half of the height, right? Okay, so let me also do this so that we can see the difference, right? So now this is doing it. As long as it's in this one, it's going to perform one task. And now if you see, now it is totally free, right? Now, if I'm in here, it is not meeting the condition, right? So as long as I'm in this quadrant, it's going to turn another color. As long as I'm in this quadrant, it's going to turn another color and basically show me a box of one color. Now let's try to create like third and fourth quadrant as well. So just to figure out, we need to think about where our position of our mouse is going to be. So I'm going to do another else if statement. I'm going to also, oopsie, I'm going to add here my set of instructions. So for instance, what do I need to put here? So for our third quadrant, let's just copy paste this first, and then I'm going to make some changes to it. Right, let's change the color. I don't know. It's going to turn, let's just make this one a change of color. And I want this third quadrant to be I want this third quadrant to be here, right? So it needs to be X as 0, and then this becomes half of height, right? The starting position X and Y of the rectangle, and then the width and as long as the height of the canvas, right? So here what we have done is the rectangle's position is starting from 0, but Y position is starting from half of the height. The width is basically the half of the width of the canvas and going all the way basically to height. So let me just see. Okay, so now we have to put our condition here. So what we will say here is, so if mouse X in this case is greater than half of the width and mouse Y is greater than half of the height. Let's see, right? Okay, great. So now we have our three quadrants here because all of these conditions are met. So now I don't have anything for fourth, but now you can see as long as my mouse's position is basically more than half of the height of the canvas, mouse's Y position, more than half the height, and it is still less than half of the width. So that's making us get our third quadrant. And now we've just put some color in it. Let's try and finish up our fourth quadrant. And we can put here, either you can do another else if statement, or if you don't think that it is really doing much, for any other condition, basically you're creating this, then what is happening is that it will, let's just make another, okay, I'm going to change this one as 100. I don't know, 100, 200, and 100, 100. I don't know what color that would be. Okay, it's sort of purple. Okay, let's just see. And I'm going to make it starting from half of the width of the canvas and half of the height of the canvas, and it's going to end up as the total height and width. So now if you can see, this is happening. The thing that we need to just be mindful of, okay, so these are all our 4 quadrants, and it is actually creating as long as it's happening. The only difference is if we go back here, and you can see we also have, like, apart from greater than and less than sign, we also have greater than or equal to. The thing with greater than or equal to is that it gives us a bit more precise control in terms of where and how we want to position it. So for instance, remember, if none of these conditions are met, right, the top 3 ones, in any of, whenever these conditions are not met, this condition is going to be met. So we will basically see a 4th quadrant purple one appearing, the 4th box. So I don't know if I can show you exactly, but okay, let me try. If my mouse is basically, I don't know if it's going to be super visible, but if it's here somewhere in between, if it doesn't happen, it should again show the, okay, can you see the difference suddenly? Oops, I moved it. So just here. Okay, I'm going to leave my mouse here. So if you see here, what is happening is that my mouse is basically, although technically it's between the 1st and the 3rd quadrant, but there is like slight position where I haven't specified if it to be equal. So if it's matching up any of these positions, it is running, because it's not meeting any of the 3 conditions, it is directly going to the 4th condition, which is our quadrant. So if we want to make it a bit more precise and not, you know, just to avoid this kind of error or something happening, we can introduce this. So it just gives a bit more control in our code. So that's one thing that you can think of if you don't want some kind of like jumpy or error prone sort of code. If we do that, then, you know, we will sort of avoid this thing happening. So now that you know how our conditionals work, how we can introduce branching, how we can combine 2 or more conditions together, why don't you experiment and check out if how the branching works out for you. All right.